Hello and welcome to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. I'm Ralph Russo, the college football writer with the Associated Press. Today on the show, we have two guests. First, my interview with one of the up-and-coming coaches in college football, Billy Napier from Louisiana-Lafayette. The Ragin Cajuns are 3-0 and have one of the most impressive victories of the season, visiting Iowa State and beating a Big 12 team going away. We'll talk to Napier about his career, working with both Dabo Swinney and Nick Saban, a difficult offseason that included the death of an assistant coach at ULL, and his very, very good team heading into a very big game. Then we'll catch up with my friend Bruce Feldman of Fox and The Athletic. Bruce has a new book coming out on LSU coach Ed Orgeron. We talk about Flip the Script and the other coach Bruce has written a book about, Mike Leach, whose new team, Mississippi State, turned in the most impressive performance of last weekend against Orgeron and the defending champion Tigers. Thanks for listening to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. You can find us on Westwood One Podcast, Apple Podcasts, just about anywhere you like to get your podcast. If you like what you hear, give us a good review. It helps us find more college football fans, and it helps more college football fans find us. And away we go. Joining me first on the podcast today is Billy Napier, coach of University of Louisiana at Lafayette. The Ragin Cajuns are 3-0. They were ranked for a little while in the AP poll. The Big Ten team showed up again. And, listen, Coach, just so you know, I don't vote. We just count the votes here at the AP. You slid out of the poll. I would have endorsed you to stay in there. You guys have been pretty darn impressive. But losing the ranking doesn't mean you haven't had a really good season so far. A great win against Iowa State. Appreciate you coming on here. And, congratulations so far on a good first 3 games of the season.
Yeah, Ralph, we're thankful you're covering our team, man. I think certainly fortunate to have a great staff and a really good group of players. Been a lot of fun to coach this group, and, we're off to a good start and excited about the challenges that are in front of us. Before
I get deep into the current Ragin Cajuns, I want to ask you a little bit about, your career, because it's been an interesting ride. And so this is a little tip for all you aspiring journalists or radio interviewers. The way to get on someone's good side is generally not to ask them about the time that they were fired to start the interview. But Billy, I got to ask you about that because it's got to be an interesting part of your career. You were on Clemson's staff early in Dabo's career. You were an offensive coordinator at 30 years old. I don't know if I did the math right there, but you were pretty young as an offensive coordinator, and then things didn't quite work out. What did that moment in your career, what did that early part of your career, how did that set forth where you ended up becoming?
Well, I think the big thing here is I probably had a little too much responsibility, truth be known, for my experience at my age. I wasn't, looking back at it, I mean, don't get me wrong, I gave great effort and I really worked hard at it. I was certainly appreciative of the opportunity, but, I think as you grow as a coach and as a person and as a leader down the road, you look back, you're like, man, what was I doing? So, I think it was huge for me. I think I probably at that point in my career needed a piece of humble pie. And I had been going nothing but up, having a chance to be a full-time coach at 26 and, very quickly becoming the play caller and the coordinator at 28, 29, 30. And I think, the first year there as the play caller, we had a great year. We set multiple records. We won our division, played the conference championship game, won the bowl game. So maybe that all came a little too easy. I don't think we coached them as well. The second year, we certainly lost a lot of good players too, but in general, I think Dabo had a tough decision to make and certainly respected that decision, and a lot of us that got held over from the previous staff were a part of that. So, but, I think at that point, I got an opportunity to go work for Coach Saban in Alabama, and that 2011 season was I learned probably more in that year than I had learned in the previous 10 and really set me up to continue to grow as a coach and as a leader, have an opportunity to observe not only Coach Saban and his process, but a chance to meet a lot of terrific people and some of the best at their profession while there. And that led to an opportunity to come back there with a few stops in between. But, overall, I think it was a blessing in disguise, and probably needed it. And it helped me kind of recenter and really think about ways that I could improve and go back to the drawing board.
So I'm curious to answer this question, too, or your answer on this question, because we hear a lot about Alabama and its army of analysts, and now a lot of programs do this. I think to a certain degree, I don't know if Nick was the first to do it, but he was the first to sort of put a machine in place where they really added a lot of brain power behind all the manpower, right, with the analysts. So you talk about how much you learned in that role. I think for a lot of us, we kind of wonder, what is that role? What exactly is that? And we hear bits and pieces of it, so I'll ask you, what was that role as an Alabama analyst in 2011?
Well, typically, you get assigned an assistant coach to work with, a position group where you're shadowing that coach and helping that coach. I think you've got kind of a group of second-tier people, on offense, defense, and special teams, and there's tasks delegated amongst that group, some young, some old, and I think that everybody's got a job to do. And, I happen to be fortunate enough to have the opportunity to observe Jim McElwain, who was our play caller and quarterback coach, not to mention all the other things that, you see just on a daily basis. But, I went there originally, didn't know exactly what my job was going to be. He didn't have a job open. Just asked me to come spend a year with him. Thought maybe it might be on defense, might be on special teams. And then ultimately, after being there a couple of days, a couple of weeks, he told me just to go with Mac, and that ended up being huge. So learned a ton there. And, you go to practice every day. You can't coach on the field. So you got time to think, time to observe not only the offensive operation, but also the defensive operation. You get a chance you got more time. I didn't have to go on the road recruiting, so I worked on off-season projects, really had a chance to dig into all the areas of the organization, whether that's strength and conditioning, nutrition, the training room, any and all of the above. So it's really was a tremendous experience for me. I certainly would not be where I'm at today without that experience.
This, I'm sure, I know you get this question a lot because you've had a chance to work for what are right now considered, 1 and 1A, right? Nick Saban, Dabo Swinney are sitting at the top of, college football's mountain of coaches right now. So I'd be remiss not to ask you, because as we see them, they are very different public personalities, I should say. But you've got a chance to work for both of them. Give me the compare and contrast. What's it like working for the two of them? Where are they? Where do you see the similarities, and where do you say, now here's where they're very different?
Well, I think obviously they've both been very successful as a result of having a lot of conviction and belief about what they want their program to be like, how they want to play, what the intangibles that they want their team to play with. I think they have a big picture approach. They've got an army of people. The infrastructure has multiple layers to it. I think they've got a year-round plan for their players from a development standpoint, player, student, and person. And I think that they've evaluated well and recruited well. Certainly starts with the personnel. They work hard in that area. I think they realize the importance of evaluating and recruiting. And then they've surrounded themselves with good people. As leaders, I think they know the value of talented people, and one has had attrition, somewhat more attrition. The other's been able to hang on to the majority of his staff. So they've handled both of those scenarios well. And I think they've been consistent with their process over time, and they've continued to make it better. They're always quality control in everything that they do. and certainly getting a little bit better all the time. So there's more commonality than you would think. Personality is one thing, but, as a competitor and as a leader, as an organizer, I think that you'd be surprised how much they have in common. And certainly, Dabo with his Alabama connections and insight there, basically what he's done is he's copied that blueprint, from an organizational perspective. They've got the same number of people and a lot of the same processes in place.
Yeah, I've tried to explain it to people as the blueprint is in many ways the same. It's just a matter of Dabo does it a Dabo way with Dabo's personality, and Coach Saban does it, Coach Saban way with his personality, and clearly they have, Dabo has morphed his person, and the personality is an important part of it, right? Like you have to be true to who you are, and I would imagine as a coach that's one of the things you have to figure out, like be true to what you are, but how do I implement this blueprint being true to what I am?
Yeah, I think being authentic is the key here, and that's exactly what you're getting from both of these guys. I mean, they're authentic as they're always going to be honest and straightforward and truthful, even when it hurts sometimes. I think, I think that's one of the reasons they've been able to be successful is they're themselves and they've put their spin on it, and they've got a lot of confidence and belief in that.
So this is going to sound like an odd question. Do you as a coach have to learn to be authentic? In other words, does Billy Napier have to look at himself and say, who am I? Like, what do I understand I want to do it Coach Saban's way. I want to do it Coach Swinney's way as far as the blueprint. But as you were developing as a coach, did you have to sort of figure out what am I? What is my authentic?
Yeah, no, I think when you get an opportunity to be a head coach, a lot of these things you've thought through. You've taken the good and the bad from a lot of places. I've been fortunate to not only work with a lot of great head coaches. I also observed my dad. My dad was a football coach in the state of Georgia. Grew up eating it, sleeping it, breathing it. I was in the weight room, equipment room, on the practice field, on the bus. For a long time there, I knew I wanted to be a coach. So you're always envisioning maybe these opportunities that you get as a coordinator, as a play caller, as a potential head coach down the road. So that's kind of what we've done here. We've taken a combination of a lot of experiences, made it our own. I think the people you hire really contribute a lot to a lot of things you do. We've been fortunate to hire some really good people here. That's one of the things that I've enjoyed, man. I mean, I love it. All these, the planning perspective, the identity of your team and program. I mean, all of these things it's hard for me to believe that, we get paid as much as we do to do this work. So I'm living the dream and certainly thankful for the opportunity.
Let me bring you to your time at Lafayette, because now this is a program that had some success relatively recently. However, jobs generally do not open up unless there's been some hard times, right? I mean, that's just the way the nature of this beast. Very rarely do you get to walk into a place where they're coming off of a championship. Josh Heupel got that, but very rarely does that happen. So when you're evaluating Louisiana-Lafayette as much as they are evaluating you, you also have to be careful as to okay, is this a place where I can be successful? Because if I take the wrong step here, maybe it's not the right step and I could derail my career. Why did you decide, University of Louisiana, that's a place where we can do some things?
Well, it starts with the leadership. I was really impressed with the vision that Dr. Saban, president, Dr. Maggott, our athletic director, had for athletics. I think there was passion there and a sense that they were willing from a resource and personnel standpoint to do the things maybe that were important to me that I felt like would allow us the opportunity to be competitive. I do think that, the big thing is you've got good leadership. There's resources, not only a commitment to the infrastructure, but also a commitment financially, so you can go out and hire really good people. And then I think the recruiting footprint was one I was very familiar with, right? I'd been recruiting basically all the areas that we recruit now were my areas when I was at Alabama. I felt like based off my conversations with Dr. Maggard, we worked out all the specific things that I thought were going to be important. And, we got a brand new facility here that's probably, I think, 4 years old now that they just built. All the little details that we all know are important to putting a good program together, they were on board with doing it that way. And I felt confident about, being able to go in and implement our process. And, man, we've got it up and running here even probably quicker than I thought we could. So I'm proud of what we've done, and I do think that we're not done. We've got quite a bit we can still accomplish, and we're working hard to do that, working hard to continue to improve each day.
Won 11 games last year and then start 3-0 this year. Still haven't quite won that conference championship, and we'll talk about that, but it's been a weird season for everybody. We didn't know if we were going to get this season. As a relatively new coach, but a couple of years as a head coach at Louisiana, what was that ride like for you, the last 6 months or so, kind of going, are we going to play, trying to keep your players into it, motivated, but also in the back of your mind, I'm sure you're hearing, you're trying to talk to your players and tell them, guys, we're doing the best we can, stick with me, but also maybe talking to administrators and hearing some things going, wow, I just don't know if this is going to work out. So what's this ride been like for you just to get to the point of playing?
I would equate it to starting over. The fortunate thing is you got relationships with the staff. You got some processes that have been established. I think the big thing here is you had to reevaluate everything that you do. How you meet, how you walk, how you practice, how you lift weights, how you do all-season program, how you travel. There was just so much logistical information and fluidity to the situation. It truly was a couple days at a time, one day at a time, a week at a time. Not knowing what was coming next. So, you combine the COVID-19 with some of the civil unrest, the social issues. We've had other things that have been, to me, a little more difficult. We lost an assistant coach during minicamp. We had a hurricane come through the area. We've been through some things here. So I think in general, I've tried to keep the perspective that the difficult things you go through in life oftentimes will produce the most growth. You don't know that while you're in the middle of the fire, but down the road you're going to be able to look back and see how you learned so much, you evolved, you adapted, you adjusted, and you're a better person and a better leader. Certainly better able to serve people down the road because of some of these tough experiences. So it's been a circus, and it's still, we're in the middle of it as we speak here. So trying to navigate a lot of these things that we're dealing with.
Let me give you a second here. DJ Looney was your offensive line coach, not an old man. I think DJ was in his late 30s, early 40s.
31 years old.
31. Passed away of a heart attack suddenly, early August. I believe it was August 1st. I did not know DJ. I know a lot of people who knew him, and through coaches that I know and through writers that I know. What kind of a man was he? And what was that like for the team to have to, and you and his family and everybody in the ULL family to have to deal with loss?
DJ was an incredible person that had unbelievable presence, just had a lot to do with the progress that we made, in terms of the culture we'd established amongst the staff, amongst the team, his ability to say the right thing at the right time, his pulse for our staff and pulse for individual players. I think he had a unique insight with people, and I think that certainly a heck of a football coach and recruiter, but also just in general so valuable to the daily kind of operation and his relationship. So, I think anybody that has gotten an opportunity to really get to know DJ knows how good of a man he was. And certainly a great family that he came from, and I think the hard thing for us was it was an event, it wasn't necessarily out of sight, out of mind. It was an actual event for a lot of people, and that made it difficult. So, DJ's in a much better place, and certainly gone way too young, and whenever we are in the middle of these things, we don't quite get it, but I think down the road, it'll sort itself out. We'll come to grips with that and have a better understanding of that.
When you beat Iowa State, it's a great win. It's a great win for the program. It gets you ranked, all that stuff that sort of, goes with college football. But it also, puts you guys were on a big stage. And to a certain degree, it allowed this story with DJ's passing to be given sort of a bigger platform. I know that sounds a little cliche. Hey, we won one for Coach, but I got to imagine if, as you sat back to appreciate that win, there has to have been a little bit of extra feeling of satisfaction that you were able to sort of win one for him.
Yeah, no, I think our team certainly, because DJ had such good relationships with not just a small group of people, but a large majority of the team. That's just the kind of guy he was. I do think that it affected, and certainly when good things happen, I think there is a sense of, hey, you know what, DJ would be proud of that, and we've worked hard to improve and get better and try to play a certain way to remember him the right way, right, to honor him the right way. And certainly I think that's happened. It's certainly come up in conversation, and the players feel strongly about that.
All right, so again, 3-0, beat Iowa State. You guys have been very entertaining. I will say that. Maybe you don't want it to be quite so entertaining. You could probably live without it falling behind the last couple of weeks. In fact, falling behind in all your games and these dramatic finishes. But it has been a very entertaining ride to watch the Ragin Cajuns play. And you have a huge game coming up next week in the conference against Appalachian State. You guys have been the Sun Belt powers over the last couple of years. I think there are a lot of people who think we might see you both again in another Sun Belt championship game. Where is the team after the first three games? You got a little extra break here heading into App State.
Well, I think we talk about trying to be a smart, tough, fundamental team that's built, tough-minded group that's built to overcome obstacles. I think we're tough. I think we are mentally tough and able to overcome. I think we got a ways to go. I think we can play smarter. We can play more fundamentally sound. We certainly can coach better. And we've been, we kind of limped into that one Saturday. We were without 15 in our two deep. Not only banged up some, but also, and then had a couple go out during the game, but also from contact tracing and COVID-19 issues, had a few out. So, we're a work in progress. We're 3 games in, really played 3 teams that we had little or no evidence of their team from this year. 2 openers, basically. We played 2 teams. We were their first game of the year. And Georgia Southern only had 1 game, and it was an FCS opponent where they had 30-something players out. So we've really played 3 openers. I'm excited about getting into the season a little bit where we got more of a history on each team. For 2020. We need to get healthy. That's certainly a big focus of what we're doing now, working on ourselves from a smart, fundamental standpoint. And then, we got veteran players that can play better. We got young players that need to continue to develop. So we're on task here. I think we're going to work hard the next 2 days on ourselves and then turn the page on Thursday to App State. Get a little more specific in terms of ramping it up for them. So, we positioned ourselves. Certainly hadn't been as pretty as we'd like it to be, but it never is. And I do think that we found some different ways to win, and that's big. I think you need that. I think there's always games like some of these in special years when you look back at it.
Billy Napier is the coach at University of Louisiana-Lafayette. The Ragin Cajuns are 3-0. They have been one of the great stories of the early college football season, and they got a huge game next Wednesday night against App State. That'll be a fun one. That is in Boone, if I remember correctly, right, Billy?
Yeah, we go up there and play.
That's a rough place to play. All right, well, but we'll be looking forward to watching it. Coach, really appreciate your time. Thanks for squeezing me in, and good luck with your preparation. Good luck getting everybody healthy and on board, and good luck kind of getting through this season. I've heard from a lot of coaches that this is going to be a challenge all year. It's just hard to get sometimes to game day, so good luck with just getting your kids and your team and your staff through this season healthy and in one piece.
Ralph, I appreciate you covering our team, and I hope to meet you face to face one day, man.
Listen, I've been telling people that a lot. Yeah, I can't wait to get to shake somebody's hand again and be in a press box, and we'll try to make that happen. Okay, Coach?
Okay, man. Thank you.
Next up on the podcast is our friend Bruce Feldman from Fox and The Athletic. Thank you, Bruce, for coming on. Bruce also has a new book coming out pretty soon, right, Bruce? And it's a new book about, well, Ed Orgeron and his rise from a guy who couldn't get a job as a head coach to a guy who, right now is almost being considered one of the best head coaches in all of college football. So, A, thanks for coming on, Bruce. And B, when's the book come out?
Thank you, Ralph. The book will be out next month, which is October, so it's right around the corner, and people can go get it on Amazon.com now. Title is Flip the Script, Lessons Learned on the Road to a Championship. So, and just the backstory of this. So for years, I did this book, Meat Market, I don't know, almost 15 years ago, where it was about, it was about college football recruiting, and spent basically a year and a half or so as a fly on the wall when Orgeron was the first-time head coach at Ole Miss. And it was a fascinating book to work on, because he's a really interesting character, flawed and all, and let me see everything that was going on around his staff. And it was a very colorful book. And after the book went out, it got received well, and I was very happy with it. But I would get a lot of people saying, you ought to do a sequel to that. You ought to try to do it at this school or that school. And to be honest, I was like, I don't have the energy, nor would I be able to get the similar kind of access, and stuff has changed since 2005 and 6. So I don't think it's realistic. And at this point in my life, I don't see myself committing, basically more than a year to relocate someplace else and spend those kind of hours. Well, when I went down to LSU last spring, when I say spring, it was like the spring in 2019, and to do work on a story about Joe Brady, who Orgeron had kind of raved about to me in some calls we had. And so I got to sit down with him, and he had done no media at that point, and there was really no real buzz about him. And I came away going to some of their practices thinking, wow, these guys are going to be really, really good. I didn't think they were going to win a national title, but I thought they were a legit playoff kind of team. And so I started working on a book proposal then about this sequel, as I saw it, to Meat Market, because, here you have Orgeron, who is a very colorful figure, and he's had such a wild roller coaster ride of a life with so many, there's been some dark turns. I mean, he was not shy about talking to me about this in Meat Market, but, he is a recovering alcoholic, and talking about his struggles with that, and also how that really affected him in other aspects of his life. So you had this guy who had lost jobs, early on in his career, and been to the top at Miami on Jimmy Johnson's staff and learned there, but then all of a sudden this horrific, fall down, and then after the book came out, he gets fired at Ole Miss, and to see him get an interim shot at USC after Lane Kiffin gets fired, he does really well, then doesn't end up getting that job, and then gets, the crazy twist, as you know, just to get to be an interim head coach usually in college football means you usually get like 1 or 2 games. Usually guys get fired late in the year. So what interim head coach gets really much chance to prove their worth? Orgeron got 2 almost full seasons. He got 1 at USC, and then he got another one at LSU. The second time he ends up parlaying it into the actual job at the school he grew up wanting to play at, and got a scholarship there, was there for 2 weeks, got homesick and returned to his small hometown, and regretted all that and what he had wasted. And so he ends up getting this job, and just the idea of that alone, I thought, made it really compelling. But then to see how he evolved, even from the guy who first got the job in 2016, was fascinating. And to be in the position to turn that team into a playoff team was one thing. And then, so after they beat Alabama in early November last year, I was like, I definitely have a book here, no matter what, because that was kind of the mountaintop at that point, I thought. So I had reached out to some people and was able to spend a week before they played Georgia for the SEC title game around the team, and was like, oh, the more time I spent around the team, the more convinced I was that this was, I was on the right track. And then basically spent the last month of the season, which included them beating Oklahoma in the playoff, and then obviously beating Clemson for the title. I just had so much great material from behind the scenes. I felt like, okay, I'm on to something, and that's how the book really came to be.
The whole idea of writing a book seems like such an incredibly daunting task. One day you and I are going to sit down over beers and we're going to walk through it, because I actually have a couple of ideas, and I'm thinking maybe, and I wonder if you're either going to scare me away from doing it or actually inspire me to do it. The conversation could result in either.
I think I'm going to inspire you to do it, because I think the hardest part for people is, especially, you write for a living. You're used to hitting deadlines. So the reporting is not going to be a challenge. I think the hardest thing is, for most people who are writers, you're mentally trained almost as a sprinter. You do your story, you go at it, and then all of a sudden you kind of unwind from it, and then you do it again. And with a book, it's more of the marathon. You are going to be grinding out 2,000 words a day, and you're going to be making calls and circling back on stuff. And it's just like, it's a process you're going to be in. Now, what was different about this was it happened in the middle of a pandemic. And so as it worked out, I got way more of Ed Orgeron's time and probably focus than I ever would have expected when I was pitching this, because he had no football practice and not much recruiting to do. He was, either at home on his porch or in the car driving to see his kids or whatever. So normally I get him on the phone for 4 minutes or 6 minutes. Now for that, I was getting him on the phone for 45 minutes. So he was able to go into much more depth. And so it made the process less daunting to have that. And you just kind of keep plugging away. And I think once you've done one, you see how the process works for you and how you work. And I think, I would not be intimidated by the aspect of writing a book, especially if it's something you write for a living.
Okay, so now I've gotten a little bit of a sneak preview. The thing that I found most interesting are his USC time and the end of his USC time. That is for Orgeron. Because, I think we all understand that he became a very different type of person and coach than he was at Ole Miss. He clearly realized that, and part of Flip the Script is the idea that, I'm sure in some part is, this is a guy who failed as an SEC head coach and then became a national championship winning SEC coach. And he clearly became a very different person and coach from his time at Ole Miss. At USC, some of that had already shown, right? He had a successful tenure as a USC interim coach, and we all knew that he seemed pretty close to getting the job, and when he didn't, it hurt him. He has been pretty frank about that, but in your book, he really got into some nitty-gritty of how that went down, and I don't know if it's been out there in other places, but kind of walk us through how that went down and why it hurt him so much when he didn't get the USC job. We know he didn't get it, and we know it hurt him, but the details behind that were pretty raw.
Yeah, I think some of what happened, taking one quick step back, is so when he gets fired at Ole Miss, it forced him to really make some hard evaluations. And I think because of his own battles with recovery, I think it probably makes him look at things more honestly than a lot of times we see from football coaches who are usually pretty stubborn in their mindsets and mentalities of just trudging forward no matter what. And so I think he was open to change and some self-reflection in a way that probably a lot of coaches may not be. And so you had that. Then when he got to USC on Lane Kiffin's staff, he had enough wherewithal to also see not only the mistakes that he made, but he really studied the mistakes that Lane made managing that team. And so I think that gave him a really fresh perspective on how can I really connect with these players and get them going. So once that happens, they go on a nice run. They beat Stanford, who at the time was a number 3 in the country. And what was crazy was they beat Stanford basically with one sub on their defense. Remember, this is USC in the time of hefty NCAA sanctions. They didn't have any depth or anything like that. So they had some good frontline players, but they win that game. And then after that game, he feels like I should get the job. and he's getting more and more confidence about it. And he feels like this is a guy who had been on, he'd helped Pete Carroll build it the first time. So I think he had a special connection to USC. He has great affinity for the program, for kind of the legend and the folklore of USC as well. So he gets into that, and he feels like, all right, after beating Stanford, I deserve the job. And he felt like, all right, the guy who I need to get on my side the most, because he has the alums and a bunch of boosters who believe he should get the job. But Pat Hayden, who's the AD at the time, not so much. And Pat Hayden, as you know, is kind of the quintessential blue blood guy at USC. He was a former top quarterback there and went lawyer and everything.
Rhodes Scholar, yeah.
Scholar, yeah. I mean, profile very different from here's Ed Orgeron, grew up basically working on shrimp boats and just, came up really grinding his way through the side door, so to speak. Well, anyway, the day before the season finale against USC, and we have this in Flip the Script, he meets with Hayden, and Hayden told him he's 99% sure he's going to be the next head coach. And so they have a contract made up. Orgeron signs it. He feels like, all right, I got this. As you can see in the book, he's also getting introduced to some people by Hayden as the next head coach at USC. And
brings his family. Brings his family.
His family there. Flies in from Louisiana because his kids were still in high school at the time.
And you could tell, he even says in the book, I think a reference, I don't know if he used the word jinx, but there was at least a little bit of hesitation in his mind, but he was kind of feeling like he was at the finish line.
He was. And then all of a sudden the next day, because it's a late afternoon kickoff against UCLA, he gets a call from Hayden at the hotel, and he was like, that was weird. And the call was like, this is a very important day for you, Ed Orgeron. And he said, I got a really bad feeling when he was like, wait, you told me I'm going to be the next head coach, and now all of a sudden this. And he said I don't know if the guys were trying to play too hard or what it was, but they had, I think their starting center gets hurt early in the game, and then their plan for Brett Hundley, who's a good running quarterback at UCLA, they just could not slow him down. And they end up losing the game, and it's not close. And on Sunday, Hayden's supposed to call him, never calls. And the family is crushed because they can see where this is going right now. And the crazy part, as this kind of, gets momentum at this point, as he's sitting there going, I can't believe this here. I am the guy, and all of a sudden he's not calling me. I'm staying. He's living out of a hotel, and he's like, Hayden never calls. He told me he was going to call. He never called. Stayed up all night, can't sleep. And then the next morning, which is a Monday morning, he gets a call from somebody else that USC is hiring Steve Sarkisian from Washington to be the job.
That did happen very fast. I remember that. Happening super fast.
And he doesn't hear it from Pat Hayden. He hears it from somebody else. And then he and Hayden have this really super tense, awkward meeting. And then they have a meeting with the players. And the players are crying and coaches are crying. And I had talked to several of these former players at USC. The one quote we ended up running in the book was from Antoine Woods, who's now an NFL defensive lineman, but was one of those defensive linemen. And I'm just going to read part of what he said. To this day, that was probably the worst day of my life. We knew the elephant. We did not beat UCLA, but when Hayden announced it to us, that was terrible. To this day, that pisses me off. I'm sure to this day, after seeing what he's done at LSU, they regret that. We just didn't understand. I know we didn't get certain wins, but the culture was changing, and it was going to the way it needed to be. Nobody comes into that situation is going to win every game. It was really heartbreaking. And Orgeron was devastated when he went back to Louisiana, and he basically had told the players, listen, I have not been around my kids for a couple of years, basically, and I need to go be with them now. And that was a seminal moment in not just his life, I think, as a coach, but also as a parent as well, because he's now having to pick up the pieces when he went back to Louisiana, as he's just devastated by the job he thought he had earned, and it completely just gets pulled out from under him. Now, if you can look back in the way it played out, Steve Sarkisian did a nice job at Washington, getting Washington from being horrible to being respectable.
Right.
But it wasn't like they were competing for Pac-12 championships. Sark goes back to USC, has a spectacular flame out, and he's gone before you know it as well. And then eventually Pat Hayden gets shoved out, and it's been kind of a crazy roller coaster ride for USC ever since.
Yeah, the part about Hayden not making that phone call, that was, I think, as I was reading through your stuff, that really stood out. That idea that the next day, Coach O is just, again, sort of waiting for that, like, okay, at least let me know. Like, clearly he knew something might be up, but not getting that phone call, and then again having to go back and really sort of embracing or trying to embrace being a dad, which was in itself a challenge, right? Because, and it is for all these guys, and really, listen, I think a lot of men have this. I don't want to just throw it on coaches. A lot of men are brought up to be like work first, work first. It especially is indicative of that culture of football coaching and in college coaching, where you just pour so much of yourself into the job that everything else in your life gets sort of pushed to the side. But he really did sort of embrace being a dad afterwards as much as he could.
Right. And it's, a couple of his sons who are twins, they were juniors in high school, and they were talking about, we've never seen our dad like this, where I've never seen him unshaven and looks like he's sleeping on the couch all day. And Ed's sponsor, who is based in LA, was like, he worried about him because he said whenever there's been a really traumatic life experience, if you're somebody who's in recovery, you really worry about how that's going to affect their recovery. And if they're going to, this is my words, not his, but fall off the wagon.
Right.
And fortunately, he didn't. And I think he found some greater strength through all this. And it's crazy how it worked out that, his wife at the time had told him, God has a bigger plan for you. Now, who would have ever imagined that he was going to end up on the LSU staff, which that part, I guess, isn't entirely shocking because he was close to Frank Wilson, who was Les Miles' recruiting coordinator at the time, but that he would end up on the LSU staff. Les Miles, who had won a national title and did really well at LSU for the most part, but would get to the point where, if you remember this, there was rumors that he was going to get fired before they played Texas A&M. It was late in the year.
Yep.
And the players really rallied for Les. They won the game. LSU can't fire Les. So he ends up keeping the job throughout the offseason. And then they get off and they lose the opener to Wisconsin. They lose a game to Auburn. And they're going to fire him early in the year. But if they had fired him around that Texas A&M game late in the year,
which they wanted to, right?
Yeah, Ed Orgeron was never part of the search. They're not going to hire him off that. They're going to go spend a lot of money and go hire somebody else who would have been the hot name. I don't think they get Jimbo Fisher at that point, but who knows who they would have brought in. But it wasn't going to be an interim situation. So, as crazy as a turn as that was, it all kind of fell in place for him to land this job that I don't think he ever could have imagined he would have had a chance at. And it's what's crazy to me is, this memory from when he was on Kiffin's staff at Tennessee, I remember having this conversation with him where could he get the ULL job as a head coach? Now, this is when he had been in the NFL as an assistant. He's on Lane's staff, and he's getting paid a good amount of money. But it was like, if ULL opens up, that could be a great fit for him, right? He's as Ragin Cajun as it probably gets, right? And he could be the mascot. Forget the chili pepper. Like that, he could have been that guy. And would he want that job? And is it fitting for him if it were to come open? To think about where he was at that point. Couldn't get some of these other really low-level Power 5 jobs. Kansas, UNLV was a discussion, and UNLV was like, they don't have the resources. Just like, so you go from really not being a real factor, Colorado State, group of 5 jobs of all levels, and then to end up with the LSU job, and then to end up leading them to a national title it's kind of mind-bending.
So, the other thing, as you're talking, I'm kind of looking it up, and this is very tangential, very, very tangential. The game that he lost to UCLA, and maybe UCLA fans would quibble with this, but that was also sort of the rise of Jim Mora. That may have been one of the heights of Jim Mora's tenure at UCLA. Like, I think it was year 2, at UCLA. And it's just odd the way these things work. The only reason why I bring it up is because I find it interesting the way these things sort of play out sometimes. That, UCLA was trending in a good direction, had a couple of good recruiting classes under Mora. That was his second year. They blast USC in a year that USC was, supposed to be good, and Orgeron kind of holds it together, have another 10-win season the next season, and then it all falls apart from there. So I find it interesting sometimes, these moments in time where at that moment, I think we probably looked at UCLA and thought, wow, this is like UCLA taking LA from USC and really starting to, wrestle the town from them. And, a few years later, Jim Mora's back doing TV, and Ed Orgeron is the national championship coach in the SEC. It is very odd the way these things happen.
Yeah, you get these big ebbs and flows. I mean, just on the tangent of Mora, I don't even remember where I was working, but I remember doing a signing day show, and he had beaten USC, like you said, his first 3 years. And yet when it came to signing day, there was like 5 battles head to head, and I think UCLA may have lost all of them. If not, they lost like 4 of the 5 to USC. And I remember talking to him, and this is on the air, and he had basically said, these kids all grew up wanting to be Reggie Bush. They remember those USC teams. This didn't happen overnight. We're not going to get it fixed overnight. Because I was just thinking, like, you guys have beat them 3 times in a row. It's like, and you're still losing to them on most key battles, which was the case. I'm not saying that if they had won all those battles that he'd still be there or not. I think a lot of these things happen with who you surround yourself with and the balance of all sorts of things. But yeah, it's crazy to see where this all had kind of gone and how you go from cold to hot. I mean, Les is now coaching at Kansas and getting blown out by Coastal Carolina. I mean, look, who saw that coming? Yeah.
It shows you how tenuous all this stuff is with coaches and how timing is in some ways everything. And in many ways, the jobs you don't get are the best things that happen to you to a certain degree. Though my guess is Orgeron probably would have done okay at USC. But in many ways, maybe, USC's had some dysfunctional issues that have undermined coaches, right? They're learning right now. The USC program is learning right now that they were behind, right? And now maybe if Coach O was there sooner, they would have revamped the recruiting department. They would have done some of the things they're doing now to better support Clay, right? Or maybe not. Maybe they still would have said, hey, we're USC. We can make this work. Go get him, Ed. And maybe in 2 or 3 years, he would have flamed out at USC as well. Again, all speculative. We can play this like what if game all day. But it is amazing how life led Ed Orgeron to the dream job at just the perfect time.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, just think of all the turns that come from it. I mean, one of the things that was fascinating to me just on this book is like I went in, I'd read pretty much everything that had ever been written about him and seen every TV piece basically. And I was like, I knew I was going to, once I got to the LSU stuff, I knew I was going to learn a lot because nobody had really been behind the scenes for that. But I honestly had no idea that after he got fired at Ole Miss, it's in the book, is that they're basically dancing in the living room relieved because it had just been that miserable for his family, especially on how they felt like they were treated there by some people. Mm-hmm. And so to see some of the turns from that to end up to where it is, as you said, it's just like, you can think how something's going to play out, but you just don't know. I mean, Ralph, and some of the stuff, like when he gets the job in 2016 at LSU and they win for him and then they finish out the year, I think they blow out Lamar Jackson at Louisville in a bowl game. It's like, okay, that's where the building blocks start. And then you kind of, once you see, and I think people will have a greater sense for this and flip the script, once you see what happened in 2017, they have an ugly loss at Mississippi State. They get upset at home by Neil Brown and Troy. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of find out why teams are different from year to year and how coaches have to juggle them and manage them in certain ways. And I think that nuance was very educational for me, just as somebody who covers the sport, to see how fragile sometimes these balances are from one year to the next with a team. And so you can see how things kind of can get sideways in a hurry.
Okay, that's perfect segue there, because from one year to another now, the season, of course, has started for LSU and the SEC last week, and LSU lost, and they lost to another coach where you wrote a book, whose book you wrote, and that was Mike Leach. Swing Your Sword is the old book it's been out for almost 10 years, right? Swing Your Sword's got to be 10 years old, hasn't it?
It's pretty much 10 years old, yeah. I think it is. And the two most opposite people I've ever met in my life, by the way, are these two characters.
That's interesting that you'd say that. Everybody kind of knows Leach. Leach is easy to get to know. I don't know Coach O as well, though. The thing that I always liked about Orgeron is the first time I met him was back when he was an assistant coach at Pete Carroll's under Pete Carroll at USC, and he really is the big personality that you see. Right. Literally the first time you meet him, he is he growls your name and he gives you a big handshake and a slap on the back. And, he hears my name, Russo, so he's got to ask, is that Russo or Russo? And when I tell him, no, it's Italian, then we start talking about Italian food. He remembered me from that one interaction for years, but he was that kind of big personality, whereas Leach is a very different kind of personality insofar as he'll give his phone number to anybody, and you can call him anytime. He might not answer the phone ever, but if you text him and tell him, "Hey, Mike, it's me," he'll call you back. Like, he's super accessible. You may have a hard time getting him talking about football, but he'll talk to you for hours about stuff.
That is pretty accurate. I would say the biggest difference is Mike is somebody you cannot get off the phone once you get on the phone. It could be 2 hours. Ed is somebody almost impossible to keep on the phone more than 5 minutes. He will call 1,000 people and have these interactions. Now, what they have in common is they both are very much, in some ways, I don't want to say man of the people, because Mike's really different in this regard, but like, you can be on the phone with either one of them, and if Ed Orgeron is going through the drive-through at Popeyes, he's going to have a conversation with the people there. Like, he connects with just random people. Leach
you can
also
totally see that,
connects with random people. They are very authentic to who they are. That is who they are. Now, Ed loves recruiting with all his soul. I don't think Mike is really that into it. I know he's not. So they're different there. I think they're probably different in this regard. I had this conversation. I feel like it was like a John Walters kind of conversation with, like, who's the last football coach you'd want to fight and who's the one you think you could probably surely take? And that's like those two guys.
Yeah, no, that's a good way of describing them as well, right?
But just, and then the idea that they're playing in the first game in the SEC was a little bit bizarre to me, but that's the way it worked out.
And again, you know them both much better than I do, but I would describe it a little bit this way. Like, I could see Coach O rolls through the drive-through and, again, gives the person picking up his food a big hello, how you doing today, and go Tigers, right? Whereas I could see Leach kind of rolling through the drive-through and, like, asking that the person giving him his food in kind of like a mumbly way, so how long you work here, right? How do you like it here? Right? Like, because Leach is incredibly inquisitive about everything. One thing you learn about when you interview Mike Leach is there's a good chance that interview is going to be you being interviewed by him. These two get together this past weekend. It became the story of the weekend, and that is, Leach goes off for 623 yards, against a rebuilt LSU team. You're right. LSU is the most fascinating team in the country in many ways because of how much they lost. And I guess we'll combine this conversation of Leach and Orgeron as far as like this. As great a year as Coach O has had, there's only so much you can do when you lose so much on top of what they lost last year. I think that's what makes it fascinating. I think we're going into this year with LSU, and it's not like all of a sudden he's going to be on the hot seat and nobody's going to buy that Coach O is a good coach anymore. But last year was such a magical season. It's going to be really hard for anybody to recreate that. And I do wonder in fact, I would ask you this. Do you think Coach O still sees himself in a position where, does he hear people saying, let's see if he can do it without Burrow. Let's see if he can do it without Brady. Let's see if he can do it without those 15 guys. Like, do you think he internalizes that? Or has he ever even said that to you, that, like, this is the next thing I need to prove myself on?
I think he's gotten so much in the mind of, hey, like, he's kind of conditioned himself to, we're just going to get better today. I mean, I think he's become very savvy at that stuff works against me if I get sucked into it. Like, there was something that he told me, like, right at the end of the book, which I thought was kind of interesting. When he said it, I'm taping everything, but when he said it, it didn't really, stick in my ear. And then when I listened to the tape back, I'm like, that is interesting that he kind of went there. And I said, so it's like, I think they're on the podium. And it was like, he was talking about the difference between being an assistant, winning a championship, versus being the head coach. And he said, was there a sense of vindication? Yeah, a little bit. But I didn't want to feel that way. I just didn't want to go there. I've gotten over the hump. I wanted to be humble and give the credit to our team. So I think when you take that as like, all right, I know that when I let the emotion, and hey, we're talking about a guy who is, he has no poker face. We've seen that red face puff up and it looks like a pumpkin, right? So he knows I got to manage that better, especially I got to manage that better Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, especially. And so I think he's mindful of that. Now, I think he's realistic enough to know there was a little bit of a perfect storm going up against them, against Mississippi State, because going into the year, they only had 5 starters back, right? And then you're going to take out, who would be the last guy on defense who you'd want to not have against Mike Leach's team? Well, the best player in the program by far, and probably the best defense player in the country, is Derek Stingley, who's a cornerback. Not only did they find out he's not going to play, they find out on the eve of the game that he can't play. Yeah. Because he has some kind of allergic reaction to something and goes to the hospital. So you take him out. Then they take out another starting defensive tackle, who I guess is sitting out the first 2 games. And now you're down to 3 returning starters. And you start looking at that. And one of the returning starters, I think, was their most shakiest offensive lineman. So it wasn't like you had 3 All-American guys. You have Jacoby Stevens, a good player. You have Terrace Marshall, a good receiver. And then you have this awesome Deculus as that offensive lineman. So it was like, when you look at what they're playing with, KJ Costello, who's a really talented player, who's played a lot of games at Stanford, albeit this is a new offense he's going into. But, Mississippi State has Kylan Hill. They have some guys now. It's like, you know what? I'm not sure. Like, I thought going into the year LSU was a 7-3 kind of team, but I didn't know that they were not going to have Derek Stingley against the air raid either. Yeah, so right. I'm not saying I would have predicted them to win Mississippi State to win the game before, but I was like, it's not shocking to see that happen. So I think the question is going to be, what does this team look like a month from now? Because there's definitely talent. I know he knows he thinks they have some really good athletes and some good players, but Joe Burrow ran the show. I mean, yeah, Joe Brady did a good job bringing in what he brought in from the Saints, but Joe Burrow in 2019 was so decisive and such a leader and ran the locker room and was great on third down and was great in the red zone. Now you're going to Miles Brennan. Yeah, he has a strong arm, but Miles Brennan's never done it in college. Yeah. So you're putting and there's no Jamar Chase now because he opted out. So you don't even have the surefire, that guy's going to win when we can go to him in crunch time. You don't even have that answer now. So it's like, when you look at what they're putting out on the field, yeah, they may have some guys who eventually are going to be high round NFL players, maybe 2 and 3 years from now. But there's going to be some definite growing pains, I think, this year for them.
Did you think, were you surprised, how surprised were you, I guess, on how well everything clicked for Leach and Costello? Because I thought Costello's a smart guy. He's also a very good quarterback. I mean, David Shaw was touting him before. I know his time at Stanford did not end well because he got a bunch of injuries and Stanford fell off. But David Shaw was pretty confident that kid was going to be a first-round draft pick and was a high-level player. So we knew KJ Costello is a good player. You're at Stanford, so you're pretty smart. The Leach offense is quote-unquote simple, but nothing is that simple. And I just figured, well, they haven't had a normal offseason here. Like, I know this is a quote-unquote simple offense, but they just, like, it's all about reps, this offense, and I don't know if they've had the reps. The fact that they came out humming the way they did, that was the only part of it that was a little shocking to me. Not that it wouldn't work throughout the season, but that it would work that well the first game of the season was a bit shocking to me.
It was, just for what you said, because of the timing, and it's so much timing oriented. But you're right. I think for people who thought of KJ Costello the last time they saw him, we my TV crew last year had their opener against Northwestern. And so myself and Brock Heward, who was our analyst, went out to a Stanford practice maybe like 2 weeks, maybe 10 days before the opener. And he did not look very good at practice. And now, look, the guy behind him, Davis Mills, he was a 5-star guy. He was just hurt a bunch, early on in his career. He's really talented. So that when you're comparing one versus the other, you could, it's not a shock that Davis Mills may be the guy you're wowed by. But KJ was really banged up. And he's, as you said, he had a lot of injuries. I remember a couple of years earlier, I forgot what game we did, but I remember writing a story, and Brady Quinn, who I was working with at the time, he was like, I think he's a first-round pick for sure. And he listed off all the reasons. And so, this guy, I think, is the most accomplished, at least pedigree-wise, quarterback that Leach had to work with, right? And he played a lot. And he's, he got a high-level education in not just, in the actual classroom at Stanford, but also learning from David Shaw. The question was going to be, how much did you retain, and how much are you able to let go, so you don't want to have, it's like that old Karate Kid line with half a glass of water. You don't want to have too much of the old stuff, and then you can't, do what Leach is requiring of you, or, may slow you down a little bit. But, man, he was hitting open receivers, and I'm interested to see, we do this all the time normally in college football this time of year. And I think in a pandemic with a crazy offseason, it's going to be even more so, because you're going to see wild swings of up and down. If this is if I asked you and set the over-under on Mississippi State at 6 wins, even after, right now, would you take the over?
Oh, I don't have their full schedule, but obviously they're playing an SEC West schedule. No, I would not take an over on Mississippi State over. Mississippi State's going to be a 7-3 team in the SEC West. I mean, I think that would be an overreaction to that one game. As great as that was, I assume things are going to get a little back to normal, and they're not going to drop four or five. Well, maybe they might drop 400 on everybody, because that's what Leach's offense does.
But you also know Mike also will have a clunker every now and then.
Absolutely.
Where did that come from?
Listen, we all threw some bouquets at Leach last week, and he deserved them because of the way that worked out. But I think within the adulation, you had to also write, listen, this is also a guy who was at Washington State and never beat Washington and got his ass kicked by Washington every year. And, Jimmy Lake coming out and saying, we know what they're doing and we're just going to stop it, right? So they'll be clunkers, and they're not the most talented team in the SEC West, not even close. But that's also one of the things that, we all tend to write, right? His personality and the offense, what gets lost in the Leach stew is he's good at building these programs that are not necessarily meant to contend, and sort of doing more with less, or at least maxing out the resources that he has. So he is a little bit of an underrated program builder. Somebody at Mississippi State was texting with me yesterday. He's like, we're just really loose. Right, and that which also kind of makes sense. Now, I also know over a long period of time, and I guess there's a long lead up to my question, there will be bumps in the road with Leach. He will be irascible at times. I'm sure there will be points where, the fan base will get a little tired of him at some point. I don't think this is the beginning of Mississippi State is now going to be what LSU and Alabama are in the SEC West. But I do think that this could be a really fun ride where they get some good upsets and they throw for a bunch of yards, and they have some clunkers in there. I think this is a good potential marriage, but I think all of a sudden people took away from that unbelievable performance against LSU. Wow, Leach in the SEC, this could lead to Mississippi State contending every year in the West. I don't think we're doing that.
No, my hunch is you're right. I mean, Mike's also 59, 60 years old. He's not, he is what he is at this point.
Right.
And he is as stubborn as they get. Everything you said, I agree with. The part that I thought about a little bit was at one point, John Wilner, who's a terrific writer in the, covers the Pac-12, had once written something, I think it was related to Cal, and just basically said, nobody has ever won a national title running, really the air raid, the traditional, like what Leach does or anything similar to it. And that is true. My counter to that was going to be, but Mike Leach will get you 8-4. Right. He could take a bad roster and get you 8-4, right? It may take a little bit of time, but he's going to be so efficient at what he does that they're going to be a problem for teams. The challenge, I think, for Mike is going to be, when they play teams that have really good D linemen, like Vita Vea just embarrassed, Wazoo a couple of times. And, if you have, like you said, what Jimmy Lake does, I mean, they're going to see a bunch of that in the SEC. They're going to see it from Georgia. They're certainly going to see it from Alabama. They probably go see it from Auburn. So I could see some of that. I also think, you could ask some Washington State fans this. Mike will bring you a lot of hope. Mike is going to bring you some frustration too, and he's going to bring you some angst for some of the things that you said. It's like you're going to take the good with the bad with him, and it's like right now you're getting the good. I just remember when he came back. It wasn't long after Swing Your Sword came out, but he got the job. And they played BYU right out of the gate on a Thursday night. And he took over a terrible program. They won 9 games in 4 years. Mm-hmm. Like, I remember going up there in the spring, and it was like they had 3 or 4 starting offensive linemen who were walk-ons or former walk-ons, cornerbacks who ran 4.8 and 4.9. I mean, it was really bad. So they lose to BYU, and then they were struggling. They win 3 games the first year. And a lot of people were like, everybody's figured out the air raid. And it was like, no, they may figure it out. They just didn't execute well enough, and he needs things in place to make it go better. But I'm convinced it's like he will win a bunch of games. He just may not, I don't know if he's going to do any better than Dan Mullen did there. And it was a different formula. I mean, I think Dan Mullen probably recruited better than I think Mike will recruit. Mike's got some guys on his staff who know that recruiting footprint. But to be really good, I think you got to still recruit at a really, really high level, especially on defense. And we'll see if they can do that. And I don't know. That's why I said, like, this was a fun story for the beginning of the season in the SEC. I don't know if let's see where it goes a month from now.
Yeah, I don't know if it necessarily changes the balance of power in the SEC, but I think it could be. I think you're right. I think the goal at a place like Mississippi State, if you can match what Mullen did at Mississippi State, that'd be a pretty good ride. I wonder if Andy Staples, our friend and your colleague from the Athletic, has been saying, well, this is the most talented team Leach has ever coached, which is probably true, right? Because you have SEC West level talent on that.
But it's relative, Ralph.
But it's all relative to what he's going. He's still at the lower end of the food chain in his division.
He never faced Alabama's talent in the Pac-12 North, right? I mean, Washington had good players. Washington doesn't have better players than what he's going to see at Auburn. Certainly, what he's going to see at Alabama or Georgia, though.
Yeah. Yeah, so he's still in I guess the point being, he's still in the same situation. He is still in the outpost kind of program where you're not going to out-recruit your immediate competition, but you have to have something that can still beat them occasionally. And even though he didn't beat Washington, he beat USC a couple of times he beat USC, and he beat Oregon for a few years straight. Now, Oregon had hit a little bit of a rough patch, but nonetheless, beating Oregon was substantial, and they beat Oregon a couple of times. They turned it around on Stanford and beat Stanford a few times. So again, I could see Leach's experience at Mississippi State looking very much like his experiences at the other stops, and that should be considered a success. I think what was interesting, the last piece of this, and we're not going to preview this week's games because we've had a really good conversation, Bruce, and I can't keep you for much longer. But I think the interesting piece of this is in the SEC, everybody thinks they could be great now because everybody's gotten a little taste of it, right? So it's interesting. Like, I remember when I covered Mississippi State and they, had some success under Jackie Sherrill. And I always felt like Mississippi State's fans are pretty realistic. They kind of understand that they have a small budget. It's just a tough place to win. But I think in the SEC in general, all of that, for the most part, except for maybe Kentucky or Vandy, is kind of out the window. Now all of these SEC West programs are like, we don't necessarily have to be Alabama, but we want to contend. And that mindset, to me, I've noticed at Mississippi State over the last couple of years, which is why even as well as Mullen did, I think they got a little frustrated with, hey, why can't we beat more ranked teams? And Joe Moorhead did what very few Mississippi State coaches do. He had a winning record, went to bowls each year, and they fired him after 2 years. Now, there was some fit issues there, whatever. So that's what I'm saying. Like, if people look at Leach and think, oh, well, this is going to be drastically different than Mullen and Moorhead, maybe not. And I just wonder, and he's a guy who doesn't necessarily take well to criticism. So if all of a sudden they lose 2 or 3 straight and he's getting some heat on him at Mississippi State, like I could see the honeymoon ending pretty quickly. I don't think it'll end this year, but I could just understand that, like, I don't think this is going to be an evolution of Mississippi State. It might look a lot like it has been, and I'm interested to see what that dynamic looks like when Mississippi State fans go, oh, wait, we're still just going to be the team that maxes out at 9 wins?
Yeah, and think about it this way. As good a job as Dan Mullen did there, he only had 1 season where he had a winning record in SEC play.
Yep.
Only 1. And to me, that's kind of crazy because you look and you remember some of the really good players.
Yeah, it's a tough neighborhood, man.
Yeah, he was there and he was 33-39, and like I said, 1 winning season in SEC play. And by the way, that's all Mike is going to get this year is SEC teams, pretty much. So, again, I think if he gets them to 6-4, that's an awesome year. 5-5. Especially when, you're getting Arkansas, you're getting Vandy, you're getting Missouri. I mean,
that's true. That's true. He got a nice draw there with the crossovers and with the extra crossovers. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that, I'm interested to see if it's going to go great. It's off to a great start. And I think it'll probably be pretty good for the first month, the way their schedule sets up. But, we'll see. Maybe KJ Costello will be the Gardner Minshew of the SEC this year, and that'll carry them. Because when you look at it, it's not like this conference is loaded with quarterbacks this year. It just, you see like I think Kyle Trask is going to have a really good season. He's off to a good start. But after that,
Mac Jones is pretty good. I think Mac Jones.
Yeah, and he's got great receivers.
And he's got great receivers. But no, you're right. I think that there are enough questions at quarterback around the conference, and that will probably level things off a little bit, especially if Georgia continues to have issues. Though JT Daniels might fix those issues right quick. But yeah, it's fascinating. It was such a whirlwind, and Leach is such an interesting guy, and his career has been so interesting, and to see it start like that. And again, the convergence there of Leach and Orgeron still trying to quote unquote prove himself, even though I know he's probably moved on from that a little bit. But I think in the eyes of many, still looking at him like, well, was that a one-hit wonder kind of deal? And for that to converge in the first week of the season was great theater. Was really great theater, and pretty good for you to sell some books.
I hope so, Ralph. I really hope so. I feel like I have good stuff in the book, and it's like sometimes you talk to your friends in the business, and they're all like, it's like a referendum on the book. I'm like, no, I feel like the book is good, but it's like how this works. You need people to want to talk about the main subject, and if they're 1 and 2, they probably all are going to want to talk about it.
I hear you. Bruce Feldman from Fox and The Athletic, his new book coming out in about a month, a little less than a month, right? Actually,
a little less than a month.
Is Flip the Script. It is about Ed Orgeron. Give me the full title there to make sure we get on the record here.
Yes, the full title, Ralph, is Flip the Script, Lessons Learned on the Road to a Championship.
Yeah, and it's a book about Ed Orgeron and the great season LSU just had.
And the foreword is written by The Rock. How often can you get that on your
that's
podcast?
very cool. That's very cool. All right.
Yes.
I did not realize that. Well, good luck with the book. You can catch Bruce on the Big Noon Kickoff Show on Fox in the mornings now. He is in studio providing his insight as opposed to standing on a rainy sideline somewhere.
Yeah.
The one bonus from COVID is that we've gotten Bruce off of the rainy sidelines. Bruce is the rainmaker in Big 12 country. Wherever he goes, the bad weather tends to follow. But he is in the studio these days and does a great job with that. And of course, you can read him at The Athletic. Bruce, good luck with the book, and hopefully maybe we get a chance to see each other sometime in the next 6 or 7 months.
Yes, I look forward to those beers, Ralph. Thank you.
And now 3 and out. First down. I was hoping to preview this weekend's games with Bruce, but our conversation about Coach O and Mike Leach ran a little long, and since I found that interesting, kind of blew off the preview. So I'll handle that here in the 3 and out. Auburn at Georgia is the marquee game of the weekend between a couple of top 10 SEC teams. You hate to always make this about the quarterbacks, but it really is about the quarterback for Georgia. USC transfer JT Daniels has been cleared to play for the Bulldogs following last season's knee surgery. But will he play? Last week, Georgia relied on former walk-on Stetson Bennett to spark the offense against Arkansas. Bennett might not be good enough to do that against Auburn. I'd be surprised if we get a ton of offense out of either of these teams on Saturday, but we're all really curious to see Daniels play and see what he means to a Georgia offense that was supposed to be wide open under new coordinator Todd Monken. Seems wise to assume that Georgia's offense is going to need a few weeks to at least become a finished product. How quickly Daniels can get up to speed will determine whether Georgia is a national championship contender. Second down, Texas A&M heads to Alabama, and I'll stop short of calling it a referendum game for the Aggies and Jimbo Fisher, but A&M brought Jimbo to College Station and gave him a guaranteed $75 million contract so the Aggies could compete with Alabama. It is fair to expect them to start doing that. Third down. Really big game in the American Athletic Conference between number 25 Memphis and SMU. At least it should be, but Memphis hasn't played since Labor Day weekend after a COVID-19 outbreak. I was talking to Tigers coach Ryan Silverfield about the past few weeks, trying to keep available players sharp while not being able to truly practice, trying to keep unavailable players engaged both mentally and physically. Keep an eye on Memphis. Silverfield, like most coaches, went out of his way to avoid saying anything that sounds like it could be excuse making, but there is no way the last couple of weeks have been conducive to preparing for a football game, especially a tough road game against a good team. Memphis is far from the only team going through this. Virginia Tech just blew out North Carolina State after a long delayed season and 23 players out of its lineup. It's just such a weird year. And even Silverfield conceded that with so much to manage, it has been difficult to focus on the task of building a championship team, which Memphis believes it might have. Mostly, they're just trying to get through the day at Memphis. That's the show for today. I'd like to thank my producer, Sarah McCrory, for making me sound good. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Westwood One Podcasts. Please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. I'm Ralph Russo, the college football writer with the Associated Press. Thanks for listening, and come back for more next week of the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast.